Hello, students. Welcome back on today's World History April 2nd lecture, picking up in World War II. I am going to keep this one relatively short. We have mandatory Zoom meeting 11 a.m. So, and that won't take long either. That'll be more just touching base. I want to see everybody there because there's a handful of you I want to talk to, touch base with, uh, to get us moving in the right direction. We're coming up on the end of the week, and I need to have head count. I need to have numbers figured out and all that stuff. So I'll try and keep these brief. Um, so for today, we're going to jump into a little bit of the American foreign policy during this time. And I'll talk on it briefly. Obviously, next year in American history, you will get a much more in-depth view, but this will just be kind of a basics overview of it. So, as World War II gets started, America is not in it from the beginning. Much like World War One, we're off a little isolated and worrying about ourselves for a little bit. But there's over time a gradual change in American policy from neutrality to direct involvement. So when this starts, we start with a period of isolationism. And isolationism is just the taking yourself out of the equation, staying away from all the ruckus. You see a fight going on, you just stay off to the side, mind your own business. Now, America's not completely detached from the conflict in Europe, but they are, for the most part, staying out of it. So, to recap the end of World War One, the U.S. refuses to join the League of Nations, as we mentioned quite a bit, and it makes the League of Nations powerless. And they don't join the League of Nations because they feel like it'll cause another world war. And would you look at that? They were right. And now they're sitting on the sidelines watching Europe burn. But they don't join. They're kind of detached from the rest of the world. Then the Great Depression happens, and the U.S. climbs deeper in its isolation pit, and which causes the whole world to kind of go into an isolationist period. The whole world freezes itself out. In that sense, the whole world doesn't really go isolated. They just don't. They economically don't really correspond. Like they just stop trading with each other. And that's kind of what causes the depression to get really bad is when the whole world freezes each other out. Every country stops trading with each other. So the U.S., like in World War One, they have a policy of isolationism. They are staying out of it, but they this time the U.S. wasn't as big on remaining neutral, like completely neutral. Remember World War One when Woodrow Wilson says we must remain neutral in action as well as thought. Well, there was no such case in World War II. President Franklin Roosevelt did not hide his disdain for Nazi Germany, and he didn't hide his support for the British and the French, and then eventually the Soviets. So there was a pretty unified anti-Nazi Germany feeling in America, but there was also that feeling of we don't really want to go to war again. World War One kind of sucked, and we didn't even get the bad end of it. We don't want to get involved in that mess. Let's just really hope that the Allies pull it out. And so there's a propaganda push in World War II, as there really is in every war conflict. And I include this form of propaganda because it's one of my favorite ads ever. When you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. What a fantastic uh, method of advertising. Join a car sharing club today. That may seem strange. What they're trying to push here is carpooling. Car sharing clubs or carpools. You know, you join multiple people. If you're going the same place, ride together. What does that do? Well, other than it helps with today's problems of fuel emissions and the environment, back then they were concerned with oil shortages. Not so much a shortage, but a deferment of American oil. We were having to send it to our allies. We were having to send it to Britain and France and the Soviet Union. And the more the American public could conserve and not use, the more we could send. And oil is extremely important in warfare. So that's this advertisement is pushing. And you can see there's a transparent Adolf Hitler sitting shotgun because this guy is selfish and didn't want to share his car with anybody. And in taking oil away from the Allies, it's like he's giving oil to the Nazis. Again, this is just a fascinating use of advertising, but effective. Can't fault it there. It was effective. Now we shift from our isolationism and slight favoritism to the British or to the Allies to flat out assisting the Allies. In 1941, Franklin Roosevelt signs the Lend-Lease Act. The Lend-Lease Act was an agreement to give Britain and eventually all the Allies, this would go to France and then China and the Soviet Union, to give the Allies war supplies, such as old ships, weapons, materials, food, anything we could spare, because we weren't at war at this time. We hadn't mobilized. We would send the Allies all this stuff and not receive any payment back. We would, in theory, lend it to them. Now, some people thought, well, we're just giving stuff away for free. We're in depression. That is the opposite of what we want to do to get out of a Great Depression. Well, Roosevelt uses the analogy of if your neighbor asks you to use your $15 garden hose to put out his house fire, are you going to tell him, hey, I paid $15 for that, you need to pay me $15 if you're going to use it? No. You are going to let your neighbor use the hose to put out their house fire. And then when they are finished, they will give it back. Which is a pretty decent analogy. Now, to counter that, a senator who was not in support of the Lend-Lease Act said, if you ask me to borrow some chewing gum, I'm not going to want that chewing gum returned to me. It's going to be worthless, which is also a fair point. These weapons or materials, specifically like the tanks and the old warships that we were lending, they were probably not going to be in any shape to be used again after World War II. They were probably going to see some heavy use. So we weren't exactly getting these back. So an amendment to the Lend-Lease Act was Britain would lease territory in the Caribbean for American military bases in Bermuda and other like Guantanamo Bay, other bases in the islands for us to use. So that is the origins of the Lend-Lease Act. And this is a huge push. This has a huge impact that we didn't foresee happening. Because, yes, we may be seemingly giving this stuff away to industries for free. It's not technically for free because we're getting military bases back, but the industries don't see a direct benefit from the military bases. But anyway, so in essence, we're giving them for free, but it is creating jobs, which the Great Depression was completely devoid of. We had a 25% unemployment rate. It's creating businesses and jobs, and it is helping our allies in World War II because they were dire. England fends off an invasion from Germany, but they were still a long ways away from defeating the Germans, and the Soviets were struggling themselves against Nazi Germany. So this was seen as a step in the right direction and a assistance to our allies, which was, couldn't be valued by money. So it helps bring America out of the Depression. And then our allies, which all of their citizens were too busy at war, they couldn't really make ammunition. They couldn't really make materials and guns and food. So they heavily relied on American support and help. And it definitely helped them win the war. Joseph Stalin, who is not a man that often gives praise, Stalin, after the war, said that the Lend-Lease Act saved the Allies, and America's help the Allies would not have been able to win had America not passed the Lend-Lease Act. Now, this act is in effect for 3 years. It ends in June of 1944, which is right around the time when the Allies start to turn the tide of the war and start defeating the Germans, and they don't need so much extra supplies delivered to them. So that's kind of when this dies down. This money, this image here to the side, this is only what is sent to Great Britain. So $28 billion, which comes out to about $300 billion today. That is $28 billion back in 1941. That is the value in supplies America sent to the British. Total, once all the Allies got involved, America ends up sending over probably $51 billion to Soviet Union, Britain, France, China, and that today comes out to a little over 500 billion. Like, that is a ton of money that was just given to them, but it ends up saving the war effort as well as somehow still benefiting the American economy. World War II is just as influential in ending the Great Depression as anything government did, such as, FDR's Works Progress Administration. We'll get way more into that next year in American history. You guys will get a healthy dose of Great Depression policies, but World War II plays just as much of a role in getting the U.S. out of it. So, and that takes to the essential question. I told you this wasn't going to be super long, and again, it's a simple question about how much money and supplies did the U.S. give the British in the Lend-Lease Act. Hey, just rewind about 30 seconds and look at the figure. Okay, very simple question, simple answer. You will put that on the same Google Doc that you have been answering the previous essential questions on. So there should be your 4th question and answer posted on there. Do not turn it in yet. You will turn it in after tomorrow's lecture with 5 questions and answers on it. So if you're watching this in the morning, we have a Zoom meeting at 11 today. It'll be quick. We could possibly even have a question of the day on it. That's kind of why I decided to go ahead and pre-record my lecture and post it, so I could split some time with the lecture and then hopefully still give you guys a question of the day, and then we could just talk about our progress and talk about the first week. So that is where we are. If you guys have any questions, please email me or get in touch with me. I will do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. And thank you for tuning in, and have a wonderful day.